Johnny Depp, Narcissist or Empath. Part 22. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor, and we get straight back to the trial evidence that has been provided to enable us to look at this, to determine what is Johnny Depp. Ben King, Depp's former house manager, testified about the aftermath of an incident at the couple's rented house in Australia in March 2015. He described the damage to the house in detail and said that Heard was crying uncontrollably. He also described searching for Depp's severed fingertip. On a flight back to Los Angeles with Heard, he noticed long marks on her forearms. He said that Heard had asked him if he had ever been so angry with someone that you lost it with them. Tara Roberts, who had managed Depp's private island of the Bahamas at the time of the relationship, testified, and she stated that she did not see signs of injury on Heard. She said that she had once seen Depp with a mark across the bridge of his nose and had witnessed Heard calling him a washed-up actor going to die a fat, lonely old man during a dispute. When cross-examined, Roberts described Depp's high tolerance for alcohol and affirmed that in one incident, Depp fell out of his hammock and was found lying face down in the sand. Roberts testified that shortly after this incident, she had arranged for Depp's 2 children and Heard to leave the island. Is this simply his addiction, or is this operating with a sense of entitlement, reduced emotional empathy, or an absence of emotional empathy, and a failure to account for his behaviours? Talent agent Christian Carino, who had previously been both Depp and Heard's friend and agent, testified that he believed that Heard's allegations were a deciding factor in Disney dropping Depp from the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise. A pre-recorded deposition of Alejandro Romero, who worked as a doorman at the building in which Depp and Heard lived together, was shown in court. He stated that he had not seen any injury to Heard's face or makeup covering it. He also mentioned his disapproval of being involved in the case. Malcolm Connolly, a security guard of Depp's, testified that Heard wanted to wear the pants in the relationship, and that he had seen her throw items at Depp. He alleged seeing scratches and bruises on Depp, but never on Heard. He testified that when he arrived at the couple's rented house in Australia, after Depp had injured his finger, he had seen Heard scream at Depp, accusing him of being a coward. Under cross-examination, Connolly testified that he had exchanged gifts with Depp, of which Depp's gifts to him were worth a lot more than $8,500. Is this bribery? Is this assertion of control by keeping this individual sweet, and therefore could also their witness testimony be tainted by this? Connolly further stated that he was loyal to Depp, citing his loyalty to employers. When a recording was played of Depp shouting, "Make me feel sick," in an incident in Australia, Connolly affirmed that Depp had been angry at the time. Connolly also testified that he had seen Depp smoke marijuana and suspect that he had used cocaine. Travis McGivern, Depp's bodyguard, testified that he had witnessed Heard verbally insult Depp and was present during an incident between the couple in March 2015, that Heard alleges Depp abused her. McGivern contradicted Heard's claims, stating that Depp did not attack her physically, although he said Heard and Depp exchanged verbal vitriol. Is this exchange of verbal vitriol 2 narcissists colliding, or is one the aggressor and the other is responding? And if so, which one? Remember that although we have established that Heard is a narcissist, and the type of narcissist that she is, she would regularly utilize heated fury, where she experiences a threat to control, which, for instance, is being insulted or shouted at by Depp, then her response to that isn't that of a victim in the truest sense, but a victim in the narcissist sense, of responding to that threat to control by the issuing of challenge fuel in a variety of different ways, one of which could be the application of physical violence and or verbal violence, insults, etc. McGivern testified that he witnessed Heard throw a Red Bull can and a bag at Depp and spat at and punched Depp in the face, resulting in his face becoming red and swollen. He also testified seeing Depp throw racks of Heard's clothing down some stairs during the incident. McGivern denied that Heard had punched Depp to protect her sister. Dawn Hughes was called by Heard's team. Hughes, an expert in traumatic stress, violence and abuse, began her testimony by describing the typical patterns in abusive relationships and how victims of abuse usually attempt to keep an appearance of normalcy. She stated that it was not unusual for women who were abused to act violently in self-defense. That, of course, can occur where a victim has emotional empathy and it's eroded by the external stressor of the abuse, so they respond with their own physical violence. That isn't the case with Heard. She acted with physical violence towards Depp, either to do so to assert control over him, or as a response to Depp's own behaviour towards her, which represented a threat to her control, causing the ignition of fury. Hughes testified that Heard's report of intimate partner violence and the records reviewed was consistent with what was known in the field about intimate partner violence, characterized by physical violence, psychological aggression, sexual violence, coercive control, and surveillance behaviors. Hughes diagnosed Heard with post-traumatic stress disorder, which, of course, as we know, is not correct as a consequence of the clear evidence supporting the fact that she is a narcissist. Of course, she believes that she has post-traumatic stress disorder. Hughes diagnosed Heard with post-traumatic stress disorder that was caused by the alleged abuse by Depp. I don't accept that. The reason being that Heard has exhibited plenty of behaviours that support her narcissism prior to her involvement with Johnny Depp. Hughes said that Heard didn't have borderline personality disorder or histrionic personality disorder, contradicting Shannon Curry. I have, of course, in my video, addressed the question of whether she has histrionic personality disorder and borderline personality disorder in a separate video. Hughes also stated that none of Heard's previous therapists had diagnosed Heard with a personality disorder, that Heard had told them contemporaneously that she had been abused, and that two of them had feared for Heard's welfare. Of course, from Heard's perspective, she will regard herself as a victim of abuse. A big question, of course, is, was she a victim of abuse? That Depp was the aggressor first, and even though as a narcissist she could be on the receiving end of that abuse, which caused her to respond in the way that she did, or was it rather the case Depp's behaviour caused a threat to her control, and her narcissism caused her to believe that she was a victim of abuse through the revision of history, and that her responses of physical violence towards him, which is undoubted, was predicated on her own honest belief through the revision of history that she was the victim of his violence. Remember, a narcissist can use the truth as also nowhere near the truth. So it could be the case that Depp is the perpetrator and Heard's response, violent, vitriolic, etc., is based upon his actual conduct towards her, which amounts to a threat to control. Or, alternatively, what has occurred is that he was not physically violent towards her, and that perhaps the fact that he was drunk, high, or had just asked her what time it was, threatened her control, resulting in her responding in the way that she did. Heard testified that the abuse began in 2012 with insults and controlling behaviour from Depp, and first escalated to violence in 2013, when she alleges that Depp hit her several times when she laughed at one of his tattoos. If this evidence was to be believed, laughing at his tattoo would be a threat to Depp's control, and therefore responding with physical violence would show the ignition of fury of a narcissist. Heard testified that Depp was deeply jealous, didn't want her to work, and that their relationship became a never-ending fight. She said that Depp was especially prone to rage when under the influence of alcohol or drugs, often disappearing after a fight. Might it be that his behaviours weren't driven by narcissism and were driven by the influence of alcohol and drugs, and his retreat thereafter was simply him removing himself once he was the receipt of abusive behaviour? Or is it the case that the rage is that of the narcissist and it's merely exacerbated by the alcohol or drugs, and him disappearing thereafter is the assertion of control by withdrawal? Heard testified that when he would get sober, Depp would go back to being this unbelievable, warm, generous, kind man that I loved, and that she remained in the relationship because she wanted to believe that Depp would be able to remain sober. This tends to support that either he was able to give her a golden period again if he's a narcissist when he's sober, or that quite simply these bad behaviours were purely as a consequence of the influence of alcohol or drugs, and that he was capable of genuine kindness driven by genuine emotional empathy when he wasn't under the external stressor of drugs or alcohol. Heard testified that during a weekend trip in 2013, Depp sexually assaulted her during a fight that had begun when he perceived that another woman was making a pass at her. If this evidence is to be believed, this would amount to a potential threat to control to a narcissist responding in such a way. Of course, it depends on whether this evidence is accepted. Heard accused Depp of ripping her dress and underwear before digitally penetrating her vagina, stating that she didn't know what to do. I just stood there. In an incident on a private plane in 2014, Heard alleged that Depp accused her of having an affair with her co-star James Franco, and then kicked her in the back, causing her to fall to the floor. Heard testified that while the incident was witnessed by others on board, no one intervened, and Depp soon locked himself in the plane's toilet and passed out. The jury was shown a text message in which Depp states that he will never do it again and blamed his illness, as well as a tape recording of Depp howling during the flight. Is this the behaviour of an individual that is not taking accountability for his actions, having engaged in physical violence that was unprovoked towards his then wife? Or is this made up by Heard? Or is it the actions of an individual under the influence of drugs and alcohol once again? Heard also claimed that Depp slammed her against a wall and threatened to kill her after she attempted to comfort his daughter, who was distressed by his drinking during a visit to his yacht. In another incident, she described Depp dangling her dog out of the window of a moving car. Heard further testified that after the couple attended the Met Gala, that Depp shoved me down on the sofa at some point. He just whacked me in the face. I suspected I had a broken nose. I remember it being swollen, discoloured and red. When she accompanied Depp to his private island, where she was undergo detox, she testified that he slapped me across the face. Heard testified that she began attending Al-Anon in 2014. Heard testified that when they were married in early 2015, she had asked her lawyer to draw up a prenuptial agreement, but that Depp had stated that the only way out of this is death, and had fired the lawyer. Is that the assertion of control? Heard further testified that in March 2015, Depp sexually assaulted her while they were staying in Australia, where he was filming the 5th instalment of Pirates of the Caribbean. According to Heard, the fight began when Depp, who had ingested 10 tablets of MDMA, accused her of having affairs with her co-stars. Is this the manifestation of paranoia, of the narcissistic kind, or of the drug-induced kind? Heard testified that Depp threw bottles at her and hit her multiple times before holding her by the neck and raping her with a glass liquor bottle over and over again while shouting, "I fucking hate you, you ruined my fucking life." If this testimony is accepted, this demonstrates the ignition of fury and physical violence. But is this of the narcissistic ignition of fury, or is this an individual that's acting once again under the influence of drugs and alcohol? Furthermore, is it the fact that he's acting under the influence of drugs and alcohol merely the fact that as a narcissist he shows no accountability for his behaviour, or is he just simply a non-narcissist that has these addiction difficulties that result in his emotional empathy being eroded to the extent that he engages in such unpleasant behaviour? Or did the incident just not happen? Heard described being afraid to move as she feared that the bottle inside her was broken. She began to black out. She also described cutting her arms and feet on the broken glass on the ground, and that Depp had threatened to cut her face with a piece of glass while holding it against her face. She denied that she had injured Depp's finger, stating that she had taken a sedative and gone to sleep before it happened. The court was shown photographs of the damage to the house. Testifying about a later March 2015 incident, Heard contradicted Travis McGivern's statement that she had thrown a Red Bull can at Depp, instead stating that Depp had thrown the can at her sister, who was trying to intervene. Heard testified that she had punched Depp after she had tried to hit her sister. Heard also testified about an incident in December 2015, alleging that Depp was pummeling her and pounding the back of my head with his fist, while screaming that he hated her. Heard stated that she got really still, thinking that Depp was going to kill her now, and he won't have even realised it. She also accused Depp of sexually assaulting her that Christmas. Heard's allegations are of very serious nature. Of course, she did not pursue any criminal prosecutions, and all of this might just be the revision of history driven by a narcissist. Alternatively, these actions may well have taken place. And then one has to determine, was such behaviour simply that of a non-narcissist who was responding to provocations with anger and possibly also acting in this way as a consequence of being under the influence of alcohol and drugs? Alternatively, are these behaviours of an individual who has no emotional empathy for his then wife, that engages in physical and sexual violence and verbal violence towards her, denoting an absence of emotional empathy, acting with a sense of entitlement, using blatant and rudimentary forms of manipulation against her, demonstrating no accountability for his behaviours? You will have your own views about the efficacy and veracity of the evidence that has been provided. Once again, I explain to you how in this particularly complex case, it could be interpreted a number of ways on each instance. We will come to our final part of the examination of the evidence before the conclusion is provided to you. Join me in part 23 for more evidence that you need to hear before you make your own assessment.